There was once a man who went everywhere with two friends, two invisible friends. I say invisible even though one of them was clearly seen and the other one plainly heard. And yet, for general intents and purposes, they were invisible in that only the man himself was generally taken into notable account. Even somewhere this side of actually knowing the secret itself, men still have knowledge of a most unusual nature. That is, they know something quite strange that they can never admit to. After Adam was driven from the garden and made to think about it, he has generally believed he now operates primarily under the auspices of his mind. Now, since I placed a semicolon, right there, it's obvious that this was not the end of what I had to say regarding the matter. But after all we've already been through, is it really necessary for me to complete the story for you? The true origin of all metaphors is in the blood. So who but a warrior would ever know this? There was once a group of kids who played hide and seek, and the lad who always won did so by always hiding in his own head. Unfair, cried the other children, who were severely retarded and covered with instinctive spots. One man says that it is hard to live the life of a mystic while simultaneously living an everyday one. And he is unaware, I assure you, of the fact that away in closed monasteries are those who think that it is difficult indeed to pursue the mystical path while so cut off from everyday life. You can live in the Himalayas or hang out in the Rockies, but wherever you are, your stomach's still going to think that your mind's a bit touched and verse vice. Once, at the annual chivalrous sing-off, one team of knights sang as their entry this refrain, "Oh, you can't get away, no, you'll never get away," which was countered in the competition by another knightly choir who sang, "Oh, we've got to get away, yes, we must get away," which in turn was greeted by a third band of warriors who musically replied, "Get away, get away, what the hell is get away anyway? We're already home and free," which turns out, curiously enough, to be us. In considering the two realms to which man has access, the instinctive and the intellectual, one man pondered, which of these two is the true source of all the bad news men seem to sense? As we wait for him to think on this, would you like to go ahead and answer? If tying fluffy tails on rats makes them seem more like agreeable little squirrels, then what do you have to say about how the mind dresses up certain ideas so as to make them presentable to take home to mama? 'Tis only ulcerated intellects that believe certain more naturally discomforting than others. Muhammad, disguised as the head pastry chef, said, "Just sprinkle some sugar on it and they'll never notice whether it's a vinegar pie or their mother's corset." To help keep the secret from man, life has arranged his mind so that whenever it hears anything that's getting too close to the subject, it translates it into being some mundane, irrelevant criticism of life itself. Is it any wonder that the human mind can protect itself so well? Just look who it has as a teacher. To try and get even, one man began describing mystics as men who make up strange little stories to entertain certain other passengers on the routine train of life. And he adds, "Don't sound so impressive now, do they?" A brief anecdote regarding the indigenous humble nature of man's intellectual processes. In an upbeat mood one day, a man said to his mind, "I'm lucky to have you." To which his mind replied, "Then I am twice lucky, for I have you and me." 21st Century Progress Report. Both instinct and intellect can still be non-unassuming in their own necessary ways. It was not misread. According to the claims of a certain telescope, there are not only worlds responsible for the proper, universal production of all of man's myths, legends, and allegories, but also unseen ones charged with mangling and abusing them. Can you still be in wonder that the longer a true knight travels, the more does his crumbling hearing aid go unattended to? On earth was once a man who demanded, "Let me out of here, I must get out of here," to which his very skin replied, "Are you talking to me?" And after that, can you still be in any doubt about anything that you should have ignored in the first place? In the beginning, men loved the idea of there being a secret to be discovered. But that got so spooky that they renamed it and began to refer to it as something sacred and unknowable. If there is one thing that instinct and the mind have in common, it is their inborn impulse to always take the easy way out. What the hell do you think survival's all about anyhow? But wait up, if that be so, then just what the hell is it that mystics are up to regarding the mind? Now that's spooky. A brief but comprehensive overview of the normal operations of the human intellect. After finding the 2,027th dog hair in his food, one man came to the immediate suspicion that he might own a dog. Once, in an alternative reality to ours, there was a parade, a most marvelous parade, but a parade that could only move forward if it did not know where it was going. There was once a man whose personal mental motto was, "I think not." "Hey," he said. "No conclusion intended." "Hey," he replied. "None taken." Only ordinary people can be driven crazy, which is why ordinary people are sane to begin with. "Daddy, who were we to begin with?" But the old man did not reply. Yet another trick that life, or somebody, is playing on man. Those of ordinary mind who may speak of a dual nature to man always do so in the context of their observation being one of criticism and condemnation. Once upon a faraway place and time was this really silly planet, on which there were native-born beings who were absolutely certain that they did not belong there and were not who they were. Then there was yet this other parade, which could only go where it was not wanted. The operational motto here being, progress makes perfect. The speaker proclaimed, "It's all in the blood." And someone in the crowd replied, "Well, obviously the biology of our hormones, but how about the psychology of our neurons?" And the speaker declared, they are there also." And a voice from the crowd replied, "But how can that be?" And the speaker said, "Don't ask me," which seemed to satisfy all concerned. Question: why do cows like to hang out in herds, sheep gather in flocks, and wolves live in packs, and lions run in prides, and humans stand so close together mentally that they all become just one big blur? There was once a genie who knew the secret way out of the bottle, but to keep it from falling into unwashed hands, he hid it. Well, he wanted to hit it, but the question was, where? The world of the bottle being so small and all. And then he finally hit upon it. He sticed the secret to the way out in the breath of all confined, and everything worked out fine. To instinct, there is nothing sacred but survival. To the mind, a similar situation, but to which it is generally blind. There was once a mystery school whose principal method was that, Whatever thoughts were passing through a student's mind, he was to mentally say to himself, using his own name, "It is I, Nikolai Stasi, having these thoughts in Nikolai's head." And after passing through this stage, they would move to repeating the idea as applied to their entire body. And once successful at that, would say the words to themselves about the thoughts they were having, but this time, rather than referring to them as being experienced in one's head or throughout one's body, the student would say to himself that the thoughts were but a part of the entirety of life, of which he was but sampling a small part. To want to know the secret is a serious matter indeed, but to go about doing it, not. Oh, you can trip on your tongue, and you can trip on your feet, but you can mostly trip on your tongue. The colossal conundrum as proposed by one knightly order. To change the flow of thought is to change the flow of blood, which initially directs the flow of thought. To try and keep himself reminded of the two worlds within him of instinct and intellect, one man stuck a squirrel down his pants and put a parrot on his head. Folks, are we talking serious aproposness here or what? Yes, there is such a word as aproposness now. To try and get even for being so mechanically talkative, one man bit his tongue, then cried out in response, "Oh, damn!" Although the price of revenge continues to rise, so too does man's ability to pay. In fact, from hence come the phrase, chump change. There was once a land in which on alternative days you were permitted to first laugh at other people's looks, then at their ideas, then back to their looks, then again at their ideas, and so on. During the break, that is, between the end of football season and the beginning of baseball. If the history of this reality is X trillion years old, and the history of this universe is Y billion years old, and the history of man Z million, and the history of thinking man several thousand, then how long do you suppose it might be before super thinkers show up to see how to trace this cosmic history through blood? On a certain world, in a certain galaxy, in a certain universe, there was once some creatures whose aversion to the sight of blood was such that they concocted a whole new realm of imaginary reality, which they christened the sacred and unseeable. For as even the simplest among us know, if you don't look at something, it can't frighten you. There was once a seeker of things mystical who worked at it so hard that life finally took notice of him, and as a reward for his efforts gave him his choice of either meeting a real live mystic or forgetting that he ever believed that they actually existed. Self-reference is the preferred civilized manner of admitting to one's dual nature, which is, of course, why you so seldom hear beavers talk about themselves. Much. The ordinary believe that the most important thing regarding the mind is to cure it of its problems. Same as how an idiot thinks he should take a shower and put on his best clothes before getting in his bed. In one land, men were secretly discouraged from becoming knights by the simple act of setting up a clinic whose declared purpose was the free treatment of all knightly ills. What better way to keep the tourists out of Istanbul than to tell them that one of the wheels on their train is cracked and must be seen to if the journey is to succeed? A viewer writes, "Why do you speak so much more about the mind than you do instinct?" "Sir, what do you think it is now swirling all around you?" "Oh, I don't know. The window in this car is so grimy that it's hard to see out and tell." As one man began exploring his newly discovered territories, he found that the simple natives already there referred to him as he who speaks with forked tongue, and was greatly surprised at the depth of their biological-based understanding. The actual purpose of the brainstem in man was to serve as a way station on the ride between Frank and Jesse James places. If the muscles and tendons of instinct is habit, then what should maybe be the strength of the intellect? One man, as he walked through life, talked to himself. This man, it might be noted, did not go far. In the beginning, all would-be mystics want a miraculous instant method for awakening and enlightenment. And what sort of perversely chuckle-fying is that way on down the line, most of them are still waiting on it. Yes, there is such a word as chuckle-fying. Now, there was once a knight who, on his journey, had a secret word to remember. But as his adventure progressed, he came upon having a secret word to never think about. Routine men's notions of certain things being sacred and demanding of inviolate reverence have all arisen from certain misunderstandings. One transcendental music lover noted, "I may not be able to define soulless, but I know it when I hear it." An intern at a certain mythical medical school began to muse unto himself. Regarding the possible pathology of the mind, would I prefer to suffer from hyperthought or hypothought? Overdo it or underdo it? The elder surgeon leading rounds that following Thursday found the idea of possible pathology of the mind smile-provoking in the notion of either over or underdoing thought, so such a downright thigh slapper that he ended up walking with a limp for most of the day. The super of one building sent around a note to all tenants asking them if they'd prefer to let those living on the lower floors be in charge of being sick or give the honor to those living upstairs. Acting in his official capacity as the head of the Department of Neurology, he issued the following statement. The normal human mind consists of 82% bullshit, with the remaining 12% being made up of additional bull hockey. As he listened to the news being read one night, a man said to himself, "You know, it has a certain rhythm to it, a certain extremely annoying rhythm. To try and get even for all of the ills inflicted on it by men, life decided to do nothing to them other than was already being done. To try and get even for all the harm it had suffered at the hands of man, life said it was going to do nothing, since the whole thing was simply a gigantic illusion to begin with." One man had what he thought of as a curious little experience. In attempting to trap a certain wild animal that was bothering him at night by its rambling around in his backyard, he set out a trap cage baited with the beast's known favorite food, but found, in spite of its observable strong desire to get to it, the animal was too dumb to find its way into the open end of the trap. But as he was shaking his head in disbelief, he thought for just a brief moment that he saw the creature look his way and say, "If you think this is something, get a load of you trying to approach new ideas." But he immediately rattled his head even more vigorously and shook the silly nation smartly from his mind. If men didn't have dumb animals to feel superior to, they'd have to invent them. Doubt it? Just take a glance downward where you stand right now. There was once a world-class mystic of whom history does not speak. who started out his journey as a comedian, although not going by that name. But as he for so long traveled through the land of seriousness, he began to eventually lose his edge and had to alter his approach. Midlife career changes can certainly play havoc with a man's mind. Thank God, add the mystic. A certain unexpected, albeit extra-dimensional, progression. The simple speak dogmatically. The more sophisticated attempt to sound knowingly vague, while those most mechanically complex want their words to be heard as being insightfully speculative and intentionally ambiguous. Then we get to the more conscious who speak, or at least think, dogmatically. In a certain dull and stagnant kingdom, it was a real accomplishment to learn to count up to 2. And although there were tales of some having gone as high as 3, even 4, they always vanished after doing so, apparently. One legend says that when life drove Adam from the initial garden, as compensation it told him a great secret, so great in fact that Adam forthwith forgot it. Note, the popular current catchphrase to blow your mind is not as new as the civilians believe. To try and get even with physical instinct, the mind of one man decided to become even more thoughtful than it already was. And from way down below was heard the mournful cry, "Oh no, Mr. Bill, please, not that." Addendum to the General Handbook of Civilization. In a better world, nothing will be anyone's fault. Of course, in the present one, seen better, nothing is already. Attention, all mystics. Please do not stand in front of civilians and interfere with their normal line of sight. The first secret of all things is in the blood, the next in its thoughts, and the one after that, the secret itself. Another test to separate potentially real mystics from the dilettantes. You can drive the amateurs nuts. After a careful weighing of the above information, a young lad interested in such matters shuddered and asked his father, "Do you realize regarding mystics what this then implies?" And his father replied, "Well, no." Hey, the old codger didn't get that old by letting people drive him crazy. Hey, if you're right, would you repeat what you recently said about how a mystic can tell that he's beginning to lose it when to him the truth starts to sound redundant? Well, sir, what do you think? The truly successful warrior is he who lives forever on the brink of disaster. Note, things not intentionally done are never truly done, nor are in any way successful to the few who know. Without self-reference, the ordinary mind cannot exist. So what's a mystic's excuse? Huh? Consider the possibility that a preeminent purpose of all thought is simply self-perpetuation. While strolling along the streets of a new city, a man heard a voice call to him from a dark alley with the offer, "Psst, dirty pictures of the mind." And he was suddenly refreshed anew to realize again just how far he'd come. To pick up where we were in general last time about the reality of a dual nature of man, regardless of what it's called, that every sane person knows full well, Everything they say, everything they do, everything they think is reflective thereof, if it is in any way self-referential. And of taking man the level of consciousness to divide it up in our own way, and down here to cover to give you a full plate of possibilities. That to just use the level of consciousness, which is the only place that you can do it, that everything below it you could refer to that covers about all heretofore and current verbal contingencies and categories is referred to as a biological / physical / instinctive. And above the level of consciousness, from the level of consciousness up, you could refer to it, to cover it all, as the psychological, the spiritual, for those of you so inclined, and the mental. The existence of a duality to man is not imaginary. Anytime a solid apparently stable name is put upon it, you have been deluded, or you have deluded yourself by accepting it, because all systems are overlapping. And what I was going to refer to specifically tonight, or a little more specifically from last time, is how this duality manifests itself and affects what seems to be the attempt to become more conscious. And also, if you recall last time, I was mentioning that all sane, ordinary people want to become more conscious. They call it all sorts of names of trying to improve themselves, trying to get ahead in life, trying to leave the world a better place. But at the early and most active stages of it, when life is running the fresh sap through man, that is, right after a child, between when he starts to think and up until the time that he has matured and settled down, is that kind of very active and enthusiastic dreaming that children have, all the way into what it seems to be the rebellion of teen years, is at the very least the attempt, without them having any knowledge of it, it's the attempt of everyone to at least best their elders. It is life pushing at the edge of the last generation's parade, and pushing people into at least dreaming about, thinking about, and ultimately, speaking en masse, speaking collectively, is that man does generationally move. But at the crudest, and at the only level that men really take any observation of, the improvement, that is, the force of life running through man, making him want to, as I was calling it, be more conscious, it normally comes out and is seen as manifestations on a fairly simple physical level. The advancement of technology, improvements in healthcare, even the body itself becoming healthier, taller, the lifespan improving. But the way that what I was describing to you, terming in general, which is not unfair and is more suited to our purposes ultimately, is that life is pushing men to become more conscious. And when a child dreams of becoming a famous ballerina, movie star, they are in fact dreaming of being more conscious, because what they're dreaming of is being something other than they are then. And don't take that as being the obvious and say, well, surely, that doesn't say much. This 8-year-old kid running around swinging a sword or doing something and thinking he's a movie star, that he's Indiana Jones or some cowboy star. To say that he is dreaming of something he is not, it would be easy to say, well, that's somewhere between ridiculous and so self-evident that it's doubly ridiculous. But you missed the point. People only dream of that of which they're not. And any sane person, when they dream of that which they're not, it is always an improvement. Because by this very definition of being sane and ordinary, a man or child or a man does not dream. A decent, ordinary, middle-class person or a child does not sit around and dream, think, boy, I wish I could finally make a killing on the stock market and leave this job here at the law firm and become a serial killer out on the road. It is not that there is no appeal to that, which is why men well, I wasn't making an editorial comment. I was saying not that there's not a mechanical appeal to that, as witnessed by the historical and the continuing popularity of movies about serial killers and rapists and all the icky side of life. But that does not constitute a real daydream on anyone's part. They do not consider it a daydream. They consider it a nightmare. If you suddenly found a priest dreaming of horrible acts committed against people in his congregation, and you said, well, I can prove it. I took some sort of psychic snapshot. I know you did it. He'd go, well, I know it, but hell, I'm just human. I don't consider that. In other words, he would not say, well, that's what I want to do. That if confronted with it, or even himself, he condemns it. Part of the dual nature, but he condemns it. In other words, all real daydreams, not nightmares, not the sorts of things that people do condemning themselves of dreaming that they would like to kill somebody or do something horrible. We're not talking about that. We're talking about that which men experience as being a warm, or giving them a warm feeling that seems to be a real, defendable daydream of some sort, or even a plan. After you're a child, you might not want to call it a daydream. You'd say, what's the kind of plan I have in mind? I haven't been able to put it into any usable form. I'm not in the midst of executing it, but I dream someday of having enough money to retire, and maybe I'd like to do charitable work. Or I'd like to, if I had more free time, I would like to do work with children. I'd like to do something. I'd like to just, it could be less apparently charitable. If you just say, well, if I had more time, if I could ever make enough money to retire, I would sit down and write that book I always have, wanting to describe what I see as being the spiritual lacking and hunger in man. All daydreams are of something you're not, but in a positive sense, you understand. So there it is, if you need to see it that way, that a child dreaming of being all grown up, an 8-year-old boy or girl, and dreaming of being all grown up, being a football star, being a ballerina, being a rock and roll star, it is not just dreaming of being older and bigger. The dreams represent to them a more conscious existence. Put most crudely, it is an improvement in their status. I mean, there's no doubt about that, and don't pass it off as saying, well, that's almost so obvious that that it's silly or that it's meaningless. It's not. Because then when you get into the operations as they run now through an ordinary grown person's mind, any dreams they have, not the nightmares, but any dreams they have, are still, or can still be seen as being a reflection of life, making men want to be more conscious. But it manifests itself in very simplistic, crude, physical forms, as I was describing. That any ordinary person is trying to improve themselves. If you can't see the physical displays of said desire, if you ask them, and they're sane and ordinary, if you say, well, I approve of the job you're doing, I see what you do for a living, I like where you live, what a beautiful wife and lovely children, what a nice dog and cat you have, and I hear you make a good salary, what else is new in your life? And the person is going to come out with some plan. They're going to say, well, I would like to, and they will say something. They always have a plan. There's some wild duck in their Norwegian future, or their Danish future. They have a plan, and the plan is always for some improvement. but the way in which it will be described, and they may be actually working on it. But even if they're not, and if they give you their mental plan, they give you a description, it will almost certainly be something of a physical nature. They want to move to a better neighborhood, make more money to retire, be able to send their children to something other than a state college. It will always be something of a material nature. But what I was trying to get you to consider, all of that still does not belie the fact that in one quite real sense, everybody is driven to be more conscious. Or if you want to real slipshod, everyone secretly is driven to want to be a mystic. But you, almost everyone but the few, get over that in any overt fashion by the time they're grown, matured, whatever it takes at their time. But the urge is still there. As long as mentally you still have any semblance to viability, then you have daydreams of some kind. I don't mean just run-of-the-mill daydreams. You have daydreams that resemble plans, that what you would like to do. So if you take the way I was describing it, everyone would like to be better, or to use our description, they would like to be more conscious. And the historic method has always been, going under various names, that the approach to it is to study oneself, the ultimate goal being to know oneself. And I tried to verbally last time, how that is in fact the larger background behind everything from religion to psychiatry, is the attempt to, religion to know God, but the fact is you're being driven and directed, whether knowingly and described in such a way as not, but to know thyself first. That you've got to have some idea who you are. You've got to know who you are to pursue a religion. You've got to be able to say, well, I am, by God, a Christian, to pursue Christ consciousness. You've got to say, by God, I am a true Muslim, to try and reach the understanding of a Muhammad. You've got to do it all. You have got to go through a period that you have got to know yourself to some degree to try and know God. You cannot wander into God being half dazed or try to find the presence of God, the secret, a higher state of consciousness. If you're wandering around half dazed, if you don't even know your own ass from your elbow, if people say, hey, there's old what's his name, and they call your name and you go, oh, yeah, that kind of thing. You cannot live in that condition. So in some sense, you've got to be a little more alert, that is, to know yourself a little bit more than the average person to even reach the starting line of being religious. The same thing, as I was describing, the attempt of psychology or psychiatry, if you want to see it in the pathological sense, that the whole thing is you're trying to know yourself by knowing the quirks and the problems and the maladies of the mind. So, and then, to cover it all, or from our view, the more specific, is that all of the mystical, the apparently, or those groups and efforts of the past known to be mystical, claim to be mystical, all of their methods in some way either consist entirely of or are based primarily upon the attempt to know oneself, and to know oneself, you've got to study oneself. And about where we were last time, I was pointing out that the question, obviously in religion, obviously in anything out in the ordinary world does not arise, but even in the specifics of the mystical realm, the question still does not arise to say, well, here it goes. If you want to study, some school says, if you want to study under this form of Sufism or Zen or a mystical form of Judaism or Christianity, whatever it is, and they say, well, it's to know thyself. You've got to study yourself and come to some kind of extraordinary knowledge. Just ordinary people are running around with their head half in a cloud. They're just operating on half the mind. They're very unalert. We can point out how people stumble around, that people are not as mental. They do not exercise their full mental or spiritual potential. Spiritual being the other dual nature of one's instinctive physical self, for ordinary people who still cling to the idea of a spiritual, all they're talking about is still something above the instinctive level. Whereas I call it mental, I know that plenty of people still call it spiritual. But they would say that you have got to study yourself. The question has never arisen, it is not taken into account. Study which self? Consider, all of you have some knowledge you've read enough and heard enough. It's not in great secret of the kinds of disciplines, methods, and approaches, supposedly, of all the great historical or even contemporary so-called mystical schools, the contemporaries just being new versions of the same old thing. But all of the ancient, honorable, recognized traditions, what do they seem to be based upon? When I say that the question doesn't arise as to which self are you studying? Having even said that, they are attempting to study one self. And I was asking you to quickly reflect on, based upon the methods they use, which self are they apparently studying? Okay. To what end? Okay. What do you think? In the study of a creature, in the self-study, a creature studying itself that is of a dual nature, here we have a most interesting case, which is safe to say since it's the only case you got. That is the only, I say here's the most interesting instance that we have here on this planet, which will obviously fit the definition or category of interesting since it's the only damn one available. You have this creature engaged in attempting to study itself. Now look at the two areas to which a man has access, which are operative in any ordinary sane person right this second. Under the category, under the question of, the matter of, the study of oneself. Right, there's several, should be salient aspects, jump right up at your throat, if not into your shorts. One being that there's only one of those realms that can be told that it should study itself, would ever think about studying itself, has any potential ability to study itself. That about covers it. And I would think that it's fairly obvious, if nothing else, you've got a 50-50 chance guessing, pretty obvious which one of those it is. All right. So a man's got two other people in him, two realms, two areas, two almost completely distinct functions, other than the fact that all functions overlap, remember. So he's got two. And here he is engaged, we'll say a man who takes this idea of a great mystical quest, a search for this grail, that he is trying to improve himself. He is trying to be more conscious. He is trying to, as some say, regain something that he feels he's lost, or, better yet, find something that he feels he is lacking. And he undertakes the most common description, the most common push given to man is, well, if you feel that way, study yourself, and then we'll go from there. Remember that that is extant all the way from the mundane world of religion and psychology and psychiatry into the apparently more exotic world of the mystical. That there is that sort of urging, or if not downright or outright statement of, well, first go study yourself, and then we'll take it from there. Work on that until something will happen, or let me know. We'll move on once you have accomplished something there. So here we have a creature, someone taking all of this matter fairly to heart and decide, well, I will study myself. Now recall, he's got two, even a would-be mystic, the same as a bricklayer and a plumber, has two natures, two areas upon which to call, two areas distinct enough to constitute two different territories to explore. But only one of them can undertake it, as far as you can tell to start with. Remember, that's still conditional. I said surely you got it, or at least you had a 50-50 chance to guess. But I'll go ahead and state, for the sake of someone who may have come in later, not had time to have a good, healthy breakfast, or I put it to you rhetorically. Here it is, someone that we're treating in a sincere fashion who believes that they're interested in this whole mystical thing, the secret. Could they start off if we told them or they ran across the directive that, well, the first thing you've got to do to ever get started, it'll take plenty of time, plenty of effort. You have got to apply yourself to studying yourself. And the person goes, okay. Can they turn to this part that's drawn spatially, as it turns out, on the lower half here? Can they turn to any part of their biology, to their physique, to their instinctive self? Is there any part that they can turn to and say, okay, guys, gals, okay, you guys, here's what we're going to do. We're going to study ourselves. I guess you could try it. I mean, if you actually applied yourself, at least to get rid of you, it wouldn't have to ever bother with you again. I assume that you are now getting the point. It is just obvious. There's nothing that you cannot get the silent, instinctive, biological side of man. You can't even talk to it in such ideas as, let's study ourselves. I hesitate to go much further in there. I mean, it should be obvious, but it's not just obvious because I'm playing with words, and it's not just obvious because I have taken the natural dichotomy of language and set up one proposition and say, well, here's what we're saying that a man tries to do, and he's only got two possibilities of doing it or two ways of doing it. And, which one is it? And you look and think, well, you don't analyze it this way, but based upon the duality, the binary basis of the language, one of them just immediately prohibits itself. And so that's why it's easy sometimes this sort of thing to be presented, and you go immediately, oh, yeah, okay. And you actually miss a little bit more. You may have the right one. Again, as I said, in a great mystical tradition, you can friggin' guess, and you got a 50-50 chance, so don't strain a shoulder patting yourself on the back. But consider, if you did try to talk, consider everything from the level of consciousness down, as fine a body, as splendid as may be your internal workings, all of your personal organs, all of your hormonal systems, your skeletal structure. It may be just a fine all-around organization down there. But to turn to it and say, all right, guys, or to any of them in specific, but let's take the whole territory. You go, all right, guys, let's study ourselves. Part of the chuckle-fyingness, a second new word, chuckle-fyingness of that, of course, is that the body does not hear words. But let's assume that it could, for some strange reason, for the sake of our toying with it, that it could hear the words. As always, when we get good, we're talking about something that's impossible, cannot be, and yet if you've got any makings of a mystic, or else a good rug merchant, or boiler room stock salesman, you've got to be able to think of that which is impossible, and yet imagine how it would be if it was possible. Trust me. That even though the man's instinctive physical self cannot be talked to directly in words, what if it could? Imagine your mind right now, just make it real simple, quite sincerely say, listen, I'm devoting my life now. I'm taking up this course of action. We're going to study ourselves, and I'm going to start with you. There's more to you. You're the oldest part. There's more to you. Anyway, you got to join in. So let's start with you. We're going to study ourselves. Now just think about it. Let's assume that all the lower part, your biological, physiological, instinctive self could hear it. It doesn't have to respond. We don't have to give it the theoretical talent of speech. Just give it that of hearing for a second. So all of that hears what you say, and it understands the words. And it ponders. Do I have to take it much further? What is it going to make of it? To say, we're going to study ourselves. And let's say that it does not, in its totality, that it does not rebel or go off. Said the mind, the people upstairs hollered down. They seem to be getting some. Anyway, they hollered down, look, we're all part of the same building here. listen, I've got this new idea. I want to study myself. And I want you to join in. And it listens. It hears the impossibility, and yet consider for a moment, for a kind of thought game, that it hears the words, it knows what they mean. It never thought about it, but you say, we're going to study ourselves, and you're part of it. I'm going to start with you. And it goes, Hey, surely you can do this, but now you guys are your mind's getting rubbery enough that you can, that you can do this sort of thing, that you can think of that which is impossible, of actually being possible momentarily, and what would happen if the impossible was possible. I mean, if you can't do that. So there it is. It suddenly, for a moment, can understand what it means, all those words, to study oneself. The impossibility that it can understand the words instantly, but never thought about it, never heard the words before, but still imagine it. So it goes, okay. That is, I'll think about it. What can I do with it? What could it do with it? I'm not even going to answer it. But consider, what could it do with it if it could hear it? But then back to me asking you to consider, from everything that is publicly and historically known about all mystical efforts, or if it helps at all, look at all the all of the collective, commonly accepted religious rituals and dogmas of every stripe from every corner of this earth. Given the choice, me asking the question, which self are they studying? Which self are they apparently paying homage to? Which self are they apparently applying their attention to? Which of the two? But if you get into that which seems to be more specific attempts for people to become more conscious, for people to awaken their consciousness, to enlighten the nervous system in some extraordinary way, to where they can see that which is not normally visible and hear that which is not normally spoken, and etc. What are they out doing? Think of all the known rituals. Think about it. What are they attempting to study? If you look upon such things as the zazen of sitting, they'll throw in meditation, but in it, the physical act of praying. Now, it appears to have that is mental in the sense of it being above the level of the instinctive life of man. It appears to have that sort of implication to it. But don't be hasty. All the attempts are to study oneself, as extremely crude as they may be. Someone praying, anything this side of desperation, that is, that you're hanging off of a cliff by your fingernails, hollering, God, if you'll let me get through this, I'll pay all my back dues at church. I'm talking about someone who tries to use prayer that they believe that has some potentially metaphysical significance, that it can be perhaps an entree into another world, that it can shake up one's system in some way, that you might, whether you picture an actual old man or woman, God in the heaven somewhere, but that prayer is used at its highest, speaking out in the collective sense, at its highest level, people attempt to use prayer and meditation, not calling it that, but it's an attempt to study oneself. They certainly don't look at it that way. And the closer we are to the collective operation of religion, such people, in fact, deny that and say that they're looking anywhere but themselves, that they're trying to project their awareness or their attention outside themselves into the holy, the cosmic realm. And it sounds right. That they'd say, well, hey, I'm praying to somebody else. I'm not praying to me, but they are. Even though they can say, well, they're praying to somebody else. It is the attempt to bring out additional knowledge of themselves. They're attempting to study what it is in themselves. Why are they praying? What are they asking for? I know there's no priest or rabbi staying around saying, you're to consider what you're asking God for. Again, not in the immediate sense of needing relief. Help me get over this cancer. Let my wife or child survive their illness. Help my business not to fail. I'm talking about people that seem to be praying over through a long-range plan, that they're trying to improve themselves. They're trying to increase their spirituality. That is consciousness. But all of it is still based upon them attempting to learn more about themselves. It is still, although not named as such, an attempt to study oneself. But now we're back again to the question, which self are they studying? If prayer indeed is an attempt to study oneself, what is it that people pray about? One more time, I do not mean the immediate cry for help me. Now I'm talking about those that are apparently praying for some metaphysical reason, for some actual spiritual reason to improve their karma, to improve their spirituality, to improve their compassion. In other words, they're talking as though they are trying to be more conscious. That is, that they're praying for help, they're pleading for help, they're seeking assistance to in some way enlarge the area at the level of consciousness and above. That's what they'd say. But what do men's prayers consist of? What are the known rituals, religious and even into the area of apparently the mystical? What are they directly? I mean, you just look at it. What are they? Which one are they applied to of these two areas? It's not that that is wrong. That's not the point yet. And since we got 60 seconds left, you know damn well I'm never going to get to the point. Well, not tonight. Not tonight. I'm sorry.